everyone, welcome back to Let's Talk. My name is John, and today we're going to be talking about 1985's After Hours and its new Criterion 4K Blu-ray that just came out. So After Hours was released in September of 1985. It is directed by one of the greatest directors of all time, and Martin Scorsese. It stars Griffin Dunne, a man who one night, after getting off of work, he goes out, he meets a young girl played by Rosanna Arquette. She tells him that, you know what, you should stop by one day. I'll give you some paperweights, some really nice paperweights. And he gets home to his apartment and he decides to give her a call. You know, he felt like he had a connection with her, things are going great for him, and she invites him over. So he gets in a taxi cab and he starts heading downtown to Soho, and what happens? Well, the only $20 he happens to have on himself gets blown out the window, and now he has no money to even pay for this cab, which really does piss off this taxi cab driver, and that would come back later in the film. He gets invited upstairs, and then from that point on, things just start to spiral out of control in this surrealist dark comedy film. And this movie kind of fits into what Martin Scorsese was doing in the 1980s with dark comedies, with movies like this and The King of Comedy. And it's funny enough because The King of Comedy is kind of what led him to do this movie, because this movie is produced by Griffin Dunne and Amy Robinson, and they really wanted Martin Scorsese for this movie. And The King of Comedy actually happened to be the thing that got him in the door for this, because The King of Comedy in 1983 was considered such a flop. It was even labeled Flop of the Year by Entertainment Tonight, which really threw off Martin Scorsese. He had spent the whole year trying to make The Temptation of Christ, and it all fell apart. So he was kind of down in the dumps, and he liked this script, and he decided, you know what, I'm going to direct this movie. And it really is something that feels very different from what Martin Scorsese was doing, but it does kind of fit in what he was doing in the 1980s, except for Raging Bull. Raging Bull kind of feels like the outlier of what he was doing in the 1980s, and then at the very end, The Last Temptation of Christ. But in the 1980s, Martin Scorsese, I feel like his films just don't get recognized as much as like what he was doing in the 1970s and in the 1990s. But he really had some great films come out in the 1980s, and After Hours is one of those films. Luckily enough, even though the movie wasn't a success at the time, it has become quite the cult film. There are a lot of people out there who have discovered this film, and I think that's because this movie is a little bit ahead of its time. When I was watching this movie last night, I realized that this really is just about anxiety. You know, this is the kind of movie you make up in your head where everything just goes wrong. What can go wrong will go wrong. It starts spiraling out of control into places you would never expect, and to places that are impossible to even get to. This movie really does dive into the surrealism as we end up in the third act. This cast features so many different actors that you will recognize, including Catherine O'Hara and John Hurd, who end up playing Macaulay Culkin's parents in Home Alone, so I always think it's funny that they both pop up in this movie. You also get Cheech and Chong popping up in this movie as the robbers, and it's really cool to see them in this movie, which really does kind of date the movie in a sense, but, you know, there's plenty of stuff in this movie that date the 1980s. You know, they're using rotary corded phones. You know, $20 wouldn't be the end of the world for me or you nowadays if we lost it. Yes, I would be crippled. It wouldn't end up spiraling into what this guy's night spirals into. And I thought that Griffin Dunne, in the first two acts of this movie, I'm thinking this guy could have been played by somebody else with better acting chops, and I get that he produced this movie. But then once we get to the third act, they dive into this one scene where he's explaining everything that happened to him that night.
It's inexcusable, so I marched right in there to apologize, but she'd already killed herself. I was too late. So
and you could just see the mania on his face. Things just start to, you know, he's just losing it. Everything has gone wrong. He can't take it anymore. He's on the verge of a mental breakdown. You know, one scene later, he looks a mess, and he's like, I wouldn't approach you like this. You know, he's all sweaty and dirty and just a slob. Everything has just gone wrong, and he's run out of ideas. He's that desperate that he has to approach people like this. And these people at first always seem like they're really nice, normal people, like Terry Garr or Linda Fiorentino, who people might recognize from Men in Black or Dogma. She's a lot younger in this movie, but all these people seem normal at first, but things just get way out of control with each and every single one of them. Will Patton pops up in this movie, which really surprised me. Every time I watch this movie, I always forget that he's in it because it's such a small role. And, you know, Will Patton has that very distinct sounding voice, and it only pops up a little bit in this movie because he doesn't have that many lines of dialogue. But it just doesn't fit the roles that you would know Will Patton from, like Remember the Titans, No Way Out, or films like that. It really is just a movie that stands out in his filmography, especially since he has a small role, because other than Griffin Dunne, everybody just kind of pops up in here, plays their role. They're not asked to do too much in this movie, but it all just comes to a fantastic third act, a great conclusion. This movie does have some laugh out loud moments that you probably will feel a little bit guilty laughing out loud about, because yeah, it does go pretty damn dark, and you don't even realize that that's the kind of movie that they're going for. Yes, the score does kind of get this feeling under your skin. You know, you're watching a movie about one man's night that is just absolutely horrible, where everything has gone wrong. And at some points, you're kind of thinking, well, the guy's kind of a dick, so a lot of this is kind of his doing. And he kind of comes to that realization, too, in the third act of this movie. Like, maybe if I had been a little bit nicer to some of these people, because some of this stuff didn't have to happen. A lot of it is caused by him. But on the other hand, some of this stuff really just gets out of hand to the point where he doesn't deserve this to happen to him. Then another thing I love about this movie is the cinematography. I never had actually appreciated the cinematography until the Criterion 4K Blu-ray came out, and then, you know, it just cleaned it up so much that I started to appreciate, wow, this is a very well shot movie. And also, the whole movie takes place at night, which I think is a really unique experiment that they did, and I really do appreciate that. It's just one night, the entire movie. The whole movie takes place at night, and New York City at night looks absolutely beautiful. I think that Martin Scorsese really captured the nightlife of, like, you know, how the world feels, especially in New York City. There's just not that many people around, and the people that are around are some of the strangest people on this planet. Everything kind of feels empty. Oh, there's only like one or two shady people in there, and that's just kind of how the world is at that time. And I think they captured that perfectly in this movie, and that's really what Martin Scorsese brings to the table, other than this one cameo he has in this movie, is that his direction really does make this movie feel special. For a 1980s movie, this could have been easily very forgettable, but the fact that this movie has developed a cult following should tell you that this movie is just really that good. It's just back in the 1980s, I don't think people appreciated it that much, and I do think it's really ahead of its time. And I think it's one you should definitely check out in Martin Scorsese's filmography if you haven't checked it out. If you were going down the list and you just happen to scroll by and go, After Hours, what the hell is that? And just kept going. No, trust me, grab After Hours. You're going to love the film. It gets better each and every time I watch it, so I can definitely highly recommend it. But before we dive into this 4K Blu-ray review, if you are a fan of 4K Blu-ray reviews, movie reviews, lists, and podcasts, shorts, we try to do them all here on the channel, and nothing would help this channel out more than by you just liking this video and subscribing to the channel. Let's dive into this 4K review.
Wanted to leave, you know, my apartment, maybe meet a nice girl. And now I've got to die for it, you know?
Well, here it is, the After Hours 4K Blu-ray, and I was really excited for this one to come to 4K because this is one of the Martin Scorsese films that I didn't own, and I didn't expect it to honestly come to Criterion. It does make sense, like this movie, and I would hope one day the King of Comedy gets an upgrade to 4K with Criterion, because Martin Scorsese has a great working relationship with Criterion. You know, this guy, he loves classic film. He really cares about film preservation. You know, we've heard of him going and having a meeting with the people at Warner Brothers about saving TCM, because all of that stuff helps to keep classic films alive, and the Criterion Collection is one of the leaders in that, especially in the physical media world. I would say it's Criterion and Kino Lorber. They're the two people that are trying to keep older films alive, help the younger generations understand what film came from, appreciate the films that influence the modern day films, and just keeps these classic film directors in your mind. And I think Criterion is the leader in that, and I'm really happy that they released this movie on 4K, especially since I didn't expect them to, if they did release this, to release this on 4K. It just doesn't feel like the kind of film that warranted a 4K. Every time I remembered seeing this film, I never thought that it looked that great. And man, I couldn't have been any more off base about that. And that's probably just because I had never seen it in the way it was supposed to be seen. Because this is an absolutely gorgeous movie, and the 4K really does bring that to light. But before I dive into that, we get some really nice artwork on the cover here. I love the combination of the green, the pink, and the black. I love that color combination. I think that's one of the best out there. You pop it open, you get the poster that you see throughout the entire movie, or the flyers about the guy robbing houses and who they think it is. And then you also get a shark biting off someone's boner, which we see in one of the scenes in the movie. It's a nice little drawing on the bathroom wall. You get a 2-disc set. You get one Blu-ray, one 4K. The 4K is on the first disc, and it has an audio commentary track on that, which will also be on the Blu-ray disc. And that Blu-ray disc is going to have all of your featurettes, or supplements as Criterion calls it. And you get a good amount in there. Nothing too special. You get a nice 2004 making of documentary, which was about 18 minutes long. You get a couple new interviews on here. One with Martin Scorsese that's about 19 minutes long, which is awesome. I really do appreciate that. You know, that's the new stuff you're going to be getting with this 4K as far as new extras that hadn't been previously released. I would have liked a little bit more. I would say that's probably one of the more disappointing things about this 4K, is that there aren't a lot of extras. Now, the extras that are on here are pretty good, so it's not worth complaining about too much, but you know, I would have liked a little bit more, maybe a new making of documentary. A lot of these actors and actresses are still around. It would have been really cool to get their thoughts on the making of this movie, what they expected this movie to be. You know, there's so many different actors that pop up in this movie that would have been really cool to get a bunch of new interviews with them. But again, that's a minor complaint. At least we got some new extras. And really the shining star of this is the visual upgrade. You know, on the 4K disc, you get HDR10, Dolby Vision. It's presented in the aspect ratio of 1.85, so it's going to fill your entire screen, and man, it looks beautiful. Now, not to sell that Blu-ray short, because the Blu-ray is that new scan as well, and it's a really good Blu-ray. When I was comparing the Blu-ray to the 4K, the differences are very minor. So if you were actually, say you're on a budget and you want to just buy the Blu-ray, I don't think that's too big of a deal, because the Blu-ray is very, very solid. Now with the 4K, the Dolby Vision and the HDR are going to make things a lot brighter. It's going to make the color contrast a lot better, but it's not the biggest difference that you've ever seen. And again, this 4K is gorgeous. The visuals are a 10 out of 10 on this. There is almost nothing wrong with the visuals as far as the 4K or the Blu-ray go. You know, there's a little bit of film grain that's over the entire film, but it's nothing that is going to take you out of any single scene. It's actually the perfect amount of film grain. It's just a little bit, because, you know, that's going to really make the image just pop off your screen. It's going to really make the resolution increase noticeable. And I think they just nailed it as far as visuals go with this. I mean, I have absolutely no complaints about the visuals. I thought it was gorgeous. Again, it made me appreciate the actual cinematography of this film, which is something that I had never noticed before. And now as far as the audio goes, you only get one audio track. It's a 2.0 mono track, and it is a restored mono track, so it is very crisp. Now if you were expecting or hoping for a 5.1 or even a Dolby Atmos track, you're not going to get that here, and it's kind of unnecessary for a film like this. You know, it's mostly dialogue heavy. There isn't the big needle drops like you would have in other Martin Scorsese movies like Goodfellas or Casino. None of that is here. It's really just more the score is the only real music that's playing throughout this movie, and then the dialogue. All that is crisp, clear, and clean. No pops, nothing. It's almost a perfect mono track. It's probably one of the better mono tracks I've ever heard, actually. So as far as these discs go, Criterion did a great job putting out a high quality disc with great audio, great visuals. You know, I'm a little bit disappointed in the extras, but not too disappointed. The packaging itself is beautiful. It really does tie into the movie, which I really love when they do things like that. Really make it feel like a collector's edition, and that's exactly what this is. It's not the best that Criterion's ever put out, but it's also nowhere near the worst. I would say this is still in, you know, their upper third of 4K releases. And if you're a fan of Martin Scorsese, and if you're a fan of the film After Hours, you're not going to want to skip this. And if you haven't gotten anything from the Barnes & Noble 50% off sale, this is one you should pick up right now. It's a steal at 50% off, let me tell you that right now. And it's one that you really should check out. I really think you're going to enjoy this one. And if I was going to give this film a score of 1 to 10, I would give this a really solid 8.5 out of 10. Definitely grab this one if you can afford it. But if not, definitely just check out the movie, because I know it's one that not everybody has seen, especially if you're a Martin Scorsese fan and you've kind of just skipped this one. I could really highly recommend you checking it out, because I think you're going to enjoy it. But anyway, guys, thank you so much for being here with me on another episode of Let's Talk. I hope you enjoyed this review, and if you did, make sure you hit that like button. Make sure you subscribe to the channel for more 4K Blu-ray reviews in the future. And then, after you're done doing all of that, maybe you want to go head out to the city at night and tell all of your friends about us. We'll be seeing you around.